Welcome into the Horse Racing Show, episode number 35. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you could join us. I must say right off, full disclosure, I am so hopped up on Jimson weed full of scopolamine that probably this show will be disqualified. But we're doing it anyway. We don't want to make light of the situation, but it's been a situation now for just about a week. It came to light just after our last taping, so we didn't really discuss the situation with the New York Times report that Justify had found in his system at the Santa Anita Derby time about 300 nanograms of scopolamine, which is used in humans as well. Maybe you have used it, especially if you have some motion sickness. You're going to be on a ship, on a cruise for a few days, you might use it. People that have had surgeries, major surgeries where they're under anesthesia for a certain length of time, doctors will give it to them. So when they come out, they'll out of the anesthesia, they'll be able to function a little better. Their stomach won't be as upset. They won't be as nauseated as they normally would be, perhaps after such a long surgery. So again, it is one of those drugs that last year, at the time of the Santa Anita Derby, let's say, was more like a speeding ticket. Now it's more like a parking ticket. And therein lies the problem with the way it was reported. Yes, it is a substance that is banned or considered illegal, but it's like a lot of substances in horse racing that are considered illegal. It's not always a performance-enhancing drug. And 9 out of 10 veterinarians will tell you, and I've talked to a few, that this is not what you would consider a performance-enhancing drug. Of course, the Hall of Fame trainer Bob Baffert has denied ever giving it to his horse, any of his horses, much less to Justify. And I certainly believe Bob Baffert. Forget all the wins that he's had and the great career he's had. Look at him as an individual. He's had an impeccable record over the years for the way he has treated his horses. What happens with a story like this, and being in a major publication like the New York Times, obviously, is you get into a situation where there's such knee-jerk reactions, and especially those who are against horse racing in general, that want Baffert suspended or banned, want to immediately rip away the Triple Crown trophy of Justify and make more out of it than what is there. I think the big story is that Justify went before and after the Derby, the Preakness of the Belmont, pre- and post-testing after the races. Nothing. Everything was clean. He was just big and strong and faster than anyone else, and as a special horse, the likes we may not see again in our lifetime, of a horse that can do as much as he did in 111 days, which is go undefeated and win a Triple Crown race. But it did happen, and the California Horse Racing Board comes out, and someone tips off the rider, and so all this continues to go on. And so what happens again is now, is it tainted? Are people upset about it? I think it's much ado about nothing, and it will pass. And Chuck Winter, who's the chairman of the board of the California Horse Racing Commission, told the Daily Racing Form, quote, "The whole premise of the story is false." And I think that's the statement that kind of sums it all up. Yes, it did happen. Yes, he had 300 nanograms in his system. A nanogram is a billionth of a gram. So if you want to start doing some math on that, basically a poppy seed gram is 300,000 nanograms. A grain of salt is 58,500 nanograms. And he had 300 nanograms in his system. So you're doing a 36 and a 35. Technically, you're speeding. Is that something that should take points away, make you go to driving class, punish you, give you a speeding ticket? I guess technically you're over. You could. But, realistically and from a common sense standpoint, no one was trying to protect the horse. None of the parties involved, the owners, the trainer, no one asked for special permission from the California Horse Racing Board. That the story comes out now, so long after he had won the Triple Crown, is a little suspect. They knew about this at the time of the Santa Anita Derby. Nobody's trying to gloss over that there wasn't a problem, that it did show up in his system, but it shows up in other horses' systems as well, and one of the reasons is because of Jimson weed. You can ingest it, the horses can. It can get in the straw, in the hay, because it grows up wild in the field amongst the hay. And so it can get in there accidentally. You've heard of people that failed drug tests because they ate a poppy seed muffin, and it showed up that they were taking marijuana, which they weren't, but the poppy seed muffin actually put enough nanograms in the drug test that it shows up that way. So it's a matter of, and we're getting into society a lot about this, it's a guilt. You're guilty, and now you got to prove yourself innocent. And therein lies the issue I had with the whole story and the way that a lot of people have handled it. And so to get all that cleared up later on, we're going to have Dr. Mary Scollay on, as good as it gets. She's Executive Director and COO of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. I've known Mary for a long time, and Dr. Scollay is kind of the go-to vet. She's been around the horse industry for years, was the former medical director of the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. She handled all the vet activities at all the tracks around the state. She was also on the New York Task Force Racehorse Health and Safety Commission. So Mary knows her stuff, and she was there for the pre and post Derby race test of Justify. And maybe she can explain it a little bit more. And is too much being made of this scopolamine, which I think it is. We'll see from her, an expert. Okay, now having said all that, we got stuff to give away. Yes, more than just a horse racing show now. It's not even let's make a deal. You got a deal. And the deal is guests, you can have you and a guest have dinner for two at J. Alexander's, which can get up to well over $100. They have great food in there. The crab cakes are incredible because they're like real crab cakes. They got crab meat in there. It's not a lot of breading. It's got crab held together just enough. That's one of my favorites. They have many things. They have ribs and steaks and great salads. So that's J. Alexander's. And to tell us more about this gift giveaway that we're having starting this week, we told about it last week. We already have one winner. We're going to have three more in the next 3 weeks. We'll announce the winner later on. But to tell us more about it is our researcher, Thomas Kenny, Mr. Thomas Kenny, who is now advanced from just mere horse racing stats to tell us about dining experiences and how you can enter this contest to win dinner for two at J. Alexander's, which has locations in several states that we're going to tell you about. Thomas?
Hey, guys. I've been doing a little bit of homework on J. Alexander's. Turns out they've got 19 locations spread across mostly the eastern United States. In total, 11 different states: Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan. I hate the two-letter abbreviations of states.
Michigan, Minnesota. Yeah, it is Michigan, yes. You got it.
North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Texas. And like I said, 19 locations. Dinner for two, that's good at any location. If you happen to stop by the Lexington location, say hi to Brandon over there.
Yeah, Brandon Crawford, a friend of ours, yes. And again, it's a great deal. It's dinner for two. It costs you nothing, but you have to do this to be eligible to win. So start doing it now. We're going to tell you about it now. We're going to announce the winner at the end of the show today, and then you still have 3 more weeks to get an entry in. And to be eligible on the horse racing show to get dinner for two at J. Alexander's, you have to...
All you have to do is click a link that's in the description of this video or in one of our social media posts later this week. All you have to do is provide your first and last name and your email. Your last name and email will not be given out. Those are kept completely confidential, viewable only by us in order to get the prizes out.
So you can go to you can also go to our website and our Twitter and do it, or
We're going to be posting later this week when the show airs.
Okay.
We're taping this on a Tuesday. Show goes up Wednesday. And so we'll be posting then, and then whenever we set up the isolations for the interviews with our lovely guests, we're going to also put up the links there as well. All
right, so that's dinner for two at any J. Alexander's locations across 11 states in these United States. And if you live in that area, especially if you don't, you're going to be traveling, passing through. Say you're coming to Kentucky for Keeneland in October. You might want to jump right in on that because they have great dinners, and I know you'll like it, and we're happy that they're aboard to help us out in this contest. And we got a winner today that we'll announce later on. What we're going to announce next is Dr. Mary Scollay will be with us. What is going on with this Justify situation? Is it too much? Is it time for racing? which I think is the most important thing, to have some uniform rules and not have California separate from Kentucky, separate from Ohio, or separate from, well, anywhere the racing, Ohio or New York or Florida or whatever the situation. There's just too many little kingdoms out there, and they need to have some united front here, and I think Dr. Scollay is trying to help that out with the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. And we'll be back with more of the Horse Racing Show, where now we're giving away Jay Alexander food right here on episode 35. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show, episode 35. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're with us. Of course, most of you, especially if you're listening to this podcast, you're familiar with the report in the New York Times last week about Justify testing positive for scopolamine, and we talked a little bit about it, some having a little fun with it at the start of the show. But when all this was taking place, I knew there was only one person, and I mean this sincerely, to have on this show, Dr. Mary Scollay, who is now the Executive Director and COO of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium. I've known her for a long time and have great respect for her. Throughout the U.S., people have respect for Mary and the work that she has done around the racetrack as a former equine medical director of the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, among her many accolades. And Mary, thank you so much, Dr. Scollay, for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
You know, I don't want to make too much light of the situation, but, you know, when I get into like 300 nanograms, and that's like tons fewer nanograms than what you'd find in a grain of salt and all with the situation with Justify, has it been much ado about nothing, Doctor, or is this something that was a little more serious and should have been taken more seriously?
Well, I mean, let's start off by saying I don't know the facts of the case. Okay.
Gotcha.
So I know what I've read in the New York Times and what I've, seen opinions on blogs and websites and things like that. But I was not part of the investigation. And so I don't know the substance of, what they found and what they determined. I mean, I have a few, I guess, thoughts, starting with your question about 300 nanograms. I got pretty studied up on scopolamine pretty quickly last week, and I found one article that referenced you could get a peak urine concentration of 100 nanograms from a horse having consumed 6.5 grams of Jimson weed. Mm-hmm. And just to give that some perspective, 6.5 grams, that's about the weight of 6.5 paper clips. Now, how that translates to a volume of plant material in hay, I don't know, mm-hmm. but it struck me that, that's probably not a tremendous amount. So is 300 nanograms in urine an achievable concentration from having consumed the plant material? I'd have to think so. Yeah. And with some drugs, there is a correlation between the concentration in the urine and what you'd expect to see in the blood. But excuse me, I don't know that that's the case with this substance. So I don't know that we can draw any conclusions about the concentration in the urine and what might have been in the blood and how it could have affected the horse. As far as that now, he was clean, Justify was, in his pre- and post-race test all the way through the Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont. So you had been around last year with the Horse Racing Commission as the medical director when he had the pre- and post-Derby test that he came out clean, Justify did. Well, so let's be clear. Scopolamine was not a part of our scope of out-of-competition testing. Okay. Because it is not a substance that has a potential to impact a horse's performance for an extended period of time after the substance is no longer detectable in a horse's sample. So, yes, we test every horse that is tested in a post-race setting for scopolamine, and there was no evidence for it in his post-race sample in Kentucky, and I understand there was no evidence for it in any of his other Triple Crown post-race tests as well. But to be fair, it was not something that we looked for in an out-of-competition test in advance of the race. Right, and so scopolamine basically is not going to make you run faster, jump higher. It's not a performance enhancer from experiences, not just Justify, but across the board. It's not seen as a performance enhancer. Is that right, Dr. Scollay? I mean, that's my perspective on it. I know there was a remark made about it having bronchodilation capabilities and easing the workload that the lungs have to do. So there is that potential. But if you look at all of the side effects associated with its use in humans, I think the potential to impede performance far outweighs the potential to enhance performance. I mean, there's dizziness, lightheadedness, drowsiness, blurred vision, light sensitivity. The list is really quite long of the side effects associated with this drug. And to the extent that they would occur in a horse, and we don't know because you can't ask the horse, are you dizzy?
Right.
I'm holding up two fingers. Do they look blurry? There are a lot of things that can't be known, but if we extrapolate from the effects in humans, I can't see how that would enhance a horse's performance.
Yeah, I can't imagine, no matter what the horse is, if you're running in a $10,000 claimer, I can't see where, as you mentioned, all the side effects. And I read up on some. I've actually had friends that took scopolamine that were having surgeries to help ease them so they wouldn't be as dizzy if they'd gone through a long time under anesthesia. They wouldn't be as, I guess, motion sickness and things like that. And I think another buddy took it that was going on a cruise for about 8-9 days out on the high seas. He took it. But it doesn't seem to me, if you're even like a 10,000 claim, you would probably judge. I'm just talking about as a fan. You'd be able to see the horse just didn't quite look right coming back, in my opinion, if you had all those side effects.
Well, I mean, again, I don't know to what extent the horse would get those side effects, and I don't know how they'd manifest in terms of the horse's appearance and demeanor. But yeah, I would have serious questions if somebody, elected to use it as a performance-enhancing substance. I think that's, decision-wise, I think that's a bit of a crapshoot, to be honest. I think it could backfire.
We're talking with Dr. Mary. Yeah, I mean, that, to me, that's what it did too. And we're talking with Dr. Mary Scollay, Executive Director of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, just taking over that post just a few weeks ago after being with the Equine Medical Director of the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission, well-respected vet for many years. And Mary, I think the biggest question in my mind that it raises with this, just from what I've heard from you and what I've read and talked to a few other vets and trying to figure out, this is not like you hear like in baseball where the guy suddenly starts hitting 50 home runs. It was hitting 14 last year. Scopolamine is not something that's been mentioned many times in the past as a performance enhancer. And then this story comes out, and people that don't like horse racing immediately start saying the horses wasn't legit. And the whole thing is not even to comment on Justify anymore, but the fact that there's no uniformity in horse racing and no one's able to say, is this like taking a Tylenol instead of taking an aspirin? Is this like going 36 instead of in a 35? Is it drastic or something that maybe shouldn't be such a considered banned or such a performance enhancing substance? I think that's maybe the biggest thing that could come out of this, is try to get some uniformity, which I believe you guys are trying to do over there.
We work at that every day. And just to give you some perspective, in human sport, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency considers scopolamine a permitted medication. Mm-hmm. So they, and they're pretty keyed in on performance-enhancing drugs. And it is not a prohibited substance for them. It is on their permitted medication list. Now, you'd still have to have a prescription and a legitimate justification for using it. You can't just decide to use it. But they apparently, human sport does not view it as something that would enhance performance.
And I would guess that, as you mentioned, that drug testing, having covered some Olympics, from equine to boxing and a few other things, that when the anti-doping people say, we don't have a concern about it, because we know some medication, like an inhaler and things have been in the past turned out to be a banned thing. If they're allowing it, I can't get too excited that this is a performance enhancer then.
Certainly that conclusion has been reached in human sport. And to be fair, our prohibited substance list for out-of-competition testing is largely adopted from the World Anti-Doping Agency prohibited substance list, with some modifications with respect to horse racing. So, we are fairly closely aligned with respect to performance-enhancing substances. Realize that there is a fairly big difference in how we regulate therapeutic substances, because we have the stewardship of the horse and the humane considerations in addition to performance enhancing questions that need to be asked. So whereas in human sport, they don't regulate corticosteroids and local anesthetics and muscle relaxants and those sorts of things. We do in the racehorse, because we don't want to send a compromised horse out there to get injured, cause others on the track at the same time to sustain injuries. There is a welfare and safety component in addition to our concern about performance enhancing substances. So our spectrum of regulation is a fair bit broader than what human sport does.
And scopolamine, I want to get this clear again. This is something that wasn't tested for before the Derby, but on any horse, right? Because it's not been considered, or the perception is it's not a performance enhancer.
That's correct. But it is a component of all of our post-race tests.
Okay. Now, you think this is going to bring racing together at all, Dr. Scollay, that someone's going to say, okay, look, this, again, you don't have to test for it before a race because most people don't think it's a performance enhancer. It is included in a post-race test, which I guess was the whole thing out in Santa Anita. Maybe we should look at our laws a little bit, our regulations a little bit, and try to get together so we don't have a story that comes out that mostly, I think, everybody outside of horse racing just got confused. I don't think they were informed as much as confused, and that creates, of course, divisions and knee-jerk reactions.
Well, so, I mean, to me, this situation is not nearly so much about scopolamine as the process applied when the laboratory issues a report of finding. And I think there's been some misunderstanding about the process. And I think the other thing is that the process is different from state to state. And to your comment about uniformity, yes, it would be helpful if we all approached the investigation process the same, the deliberation on the implications of the finding the same way. And that is not the case right now. I mean, it seems to me that the outrage, to the extent that it's going on, is really related to people saying this happened without our knowledge. How is it possible that the laboratory could issue a finding and have it go away without us knowing about it, without us understanding the process that reached that decision? And so, to me, that it's really not about the substance nearly as much as people having expectations of being included in the investigative process. And I'm not entirely sure that's the best approach.
Yeah, I mean, and isn't this, from what I understand, what the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, where you're now the executive director, Dr. Scollay, isn't that kind of one of the goals, is to try to have some uniform rules and try to have some better communication with all the states so the old one hand does know what the other hand's doing?
Well, so the RMTC, makes recommendations with respect to regulating controlled therapeutic medications or addressing doping threats, performance enhancing substances. We don't have a regulatory authority. We make recommendations to the Association of Racing Commissioners International, the ARCI, and they shepherd the model rules process. And they're the ones that really, at the moment are carrying the ball on trying to get uniformity across North America.
Which is not easy, as we know.
No,
being around.
No, it is not. It's quite challenging.
And I guess one of the biggest challenges to me I've always seen is every state, and actually they have pride, like in Kentucky or California or New York or Florida or any of the other major racing states, Arkansas, Louisiana. Don't want to leave anybody out. We're heard all over the country. But, I guess I would hope someday in there, and maybe it'd be better for the vets, I got to believe that most of the trainers would be aboard to have some kind of in-house measure to take care of things, put together a committee of so many of the guys running the states come together and have 4 or 5 members, sort of the Supreme Court, if you will, of horse racing, as opposed to taking it to Congress, which I know they want to do. They bring it up about every time something like this happens.
Well,
I threw a lot out there at you, I know, Mary.
Yep. There are no easy answers here because, not just sort of parochial politics, but there are local differences that may need to be considered in how you regulate racing. A state that has lots of horses shipping in across state lines, crossing borders, you need to develop continuity and harmonization within that entire population. Having a rule in one state when the neighboring states have different rules is counterproductive and can potentially harm a horse. If you've got a rule that is more permissive with respect to a certain medication than the states around you, you run the risk of attracting those horses that require that medication. So your racing population and the integrity of your product may potentially be compromised because of a more permissive approach with respect to a medication or a class of medications. But let's look at California for a minute. Almost all of the horses that race in California are housed at locations under the jurisdiction of the CHRB. Whereas in central Kentucky, many of our horses are housed at private training facilities or out of state. And so our ability to regulate the population is really geographically based. Kentucky and other states face challenges that aren't necessarily faced by California and the way their population is housed. So we have to write rules that address the local needs as well as the global need. And I guess that's where things get kind of complicated. Everybody agrees on a premise, this is a philosophy that we want to adopt with respect to regulating medication, but how do we implement it locally based on our population that we have to regulate? And so, at the 60,000 foot level, uniformity is great. At the implementation level, it can be a bit more challenging.
Yeah. And summed up very well, as I knew Dr. Mary Scollay would be able to do. Really. That's because, well, no, I mean, everybody, I've had friends, in the other sports I cover since this came out, the New York Times story, and they've asked me, they said, how much are these horses? They always juiced up. How many? I said, by and large, I know trainers will get fined, reprimanded. Sometimes there'll be a trace amount of something. It doesn't mean people are trying to cheat always. And I'm not here saying I love horse racing. Let's go horse racing. I mean, it's been great for my career, and naturally I want it to be successful. And I don't think I'm naive in saying I really don't know that many instances where there's just out and out cheating going on. I just have never heard of any kind of a conspiracy out there, and there's always that suspect and things they'll talk about, but nothing's proven. I mean, I don't think I'm too naive on that.
I mean, horse racing is a cross-section of the general population. And to the extent that, anybody in a business or any other aspect of society, a certain percentage of the population is going to take an edge, is inclined to, wherever possible, take that shortcut. And so I'm not saying it doesn't happen in horse racing, but Is it pervasive? Absolutely not. I mean, I consider it an honor and a privilege to have spent almost my entire career as a veterinarian working in horse racing. And, some of the best people, the best horsemen, the best advocates for their animals. Like I said, it's been an honor to be a part of it. So no, it's not rife with cheating and performance enhancing drugs and hops and all that sort of stuff. It really, I'm still a fan.
Well, I mean,
I'm still a fan.
Me too. And like I tell people that are sort of familiar or not very familiar with the sport, listen, there's a lot of money at stake here. Trainers are not going to ruin their whole career over a horse or two. And everybody wants these horses to be healthy. You want to go out there and win the race. You're hoping maybe to go on to a breeding career. And so it's in everyone's best interest for the horses to be as healthy as they can be. And that's really a simple, but I don't think, again, a naive statement.
No, I don't think it's naive at all. And certainly in the climate in which we are currently existing, we all need to be on our absolute best behavior every day in terms of how we care for them, how we elect to medicate them, how we choose to train them and exercise them, when we choose to enter them in a race, how that surface is managed, all of it. I mean, everybody right now needs to be standing up as straight as they can and doing the best they can, because the scrutiny is not going to lessen. And quite frankly, we should be doing this the right way anyway.
How do you like the new job as executive director of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium?
Well, it's new challenges. I miss my office at the horse park. I used to have a great view, and I am now downtown. But on the other hand, the eating options are much better, so it's fine.
You got a new business card.
I do, as it turns out, I'm running a business, which is probably the steepest part of the learning curve. The medication and the drug testing, and I really got to build my skill set there at the Racing Commission. So that feels comfortable to me. But the running of a business, that's a new challenge.
Yeah, because basically and help me out on this, the RMTC, I know it's about trying to have more like a laboratory standards and testing standards on a world-class level. They already do it, and they're trying to do that more. And again, as we talked about, trying to develop uniform rules and bring racing together as much as they can. Is that the simplification of it all, Mary?
Sure. I mean, you can write uniform rules, but then where the tires meet the pavement, you have to enforce them the same way. And so that means consistency between laboratories with respect to drug testing practices. That means consistency between regulatory bodies in terms of how they respond to findings from the laboratory. It is a broad process that has to be made consistent. And just the writing of a rule that everybody says, yep, that's the rule, that's the first step. That's not the end point. The end point is everything that supports the fair and even-handed enforcement of that rule.
And you still get to go out to the track sometimes, don't you?
Yeah, I'll run into you the first Saturday in May next spring. I'll find you.
No, we won't go that long. That's one of my. That's one of my favorite things. Is we have a meeting on Thursdays at NBC with all the veterinarians and the people involved, the stewards and things, and everybody always asks Mary the questions. I'll just say this: they do. I say, we got to say, what would we do here, Mary? You get all the questions. I mean, most of them, and it's probably because you announced that you listen to Led Zeppelin, which to me is what it's about.
Well, and Saturday, here's a plug: Bourbon and Beyond, Robert Plant in Louisville, and I will be there front and center. Yep.
Did I say we had the best guest? We always have consistently had the best guest. Dr. Mary Scollay has explained, I think, as well as you'll ever hear about this whole thing with scopolamine and the testing, and she's going to see Robert Plant in Louisville. There.
Yep, it's all good.
I tell you, it's all good. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Hope to talk to you again soon.
And we'll see you before the Derby, and enjoy Robert Plant this week. That'd be a great show.
Oh, I am pumped. It will be a great show.
Do you have a favorite Zeppelin song, Zeppelin album?
You know what?
I think a tough one, I think. It's almost like who's your favorite horse to me, I think.
Well, I mean, I think Kashmir was their greatest song ever.
Yeah.
So, but Stairway to Heaven, that was the theme for my prom. So there are memories there as well.
I think that was like a universal prom theme, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes. But great memories nonetheless.
Always. We would play an excerpt of that, but then we'd have to pay royalties, and we don't have that much kind of budget. But it's good in our head. We're hearing it, okay?
All right.
Dr. Scollay, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Dr. Mary Scollay with great insight into all this situation. Coming up next, we talk with trainer Graham Moshe, only here on the Horse Racing Show. Welcome back to the Horse Racing Show. I'm Kenny Rice. Glad that you're tuning in wherever you are around the U.S. or in one of the 17 countries that have downloaded us now, either on YouTube, Google Play, or iTunes. This guy is one of the great gentlemen in the sport, a terrific trainer, Kentucky Derby winner, win multiple Breeders' Cups as well. Graham Moshe joins us now. Graham, thanks for being on.
Hi, Kenny. Thanks for having me.
Let me just ask right now, let's catch up with the world of Graham Moshe, as we're not that far away from the Breeders' Cup. You've got a 2-year-old filly running this weekend that had a victory at Saratoga. Everybody gets excited about a 2-year-old. I'm sure you are about her.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. At this time of year, you're sort of looking for horses that can participate in the Breeders' Cup at the end of the year. And sharing won pretty nicely at Saratoga. She actually won on the dirt, whereas we think she could be more of a grass filly. She's out of shared account. The mare that won the Breeders' Cup for me, I believe she was 40-1 the night she won the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah.
So obviously it's a pretty special family for me.
And her name again, I'm going to write this down, make sure we all get it.
Sharing,
yeah. I like those simple names, don't you? Get them right out there.
Absolutely.
And then
she's by Speightstown, and she's always acted, she's always been very precocious but very classy, and her mother was just the nicest horse to be around. So
is it good to train like bloodlines like that, where you had experience with either like the sire or the dam along the way in the bloodline?
I definitely think it can help, and I'm fortunate enough to train for a lot of breeders who I do tend to see some of their offspring. Ironically, with this filly, she doesn't belong to Sagamore, who raced shared account for Kevin Plank.
Right.
But it definitely helps, I think, to have the bloodlines.
And then you have Mississippi, who came off a nice win at Saratoga as well.
Yeah, so she's an interesting filly. She came to me late in the spring, and we kind of pointed her for a race at the end of Saratoga. We ended up running in the Glens Falls, which she won pretty nicely. Joel Rosario gave her a great ride. This is a filly that they thought very highly of in England last year as a 2-year-old, as a 3-year-old, I'm sorry. And then she kind of tailed off this year. So they thought that bringing her over here and a change of scenery might help her. And it seems to have done the job. And I'm pretty excited about it. We'll probably run her in the Flower Bowl at Belmont.
And then, obviously, all goes well, you might have 2 going on to Santa Anita later on.
I mean, like I say, at this time of year, you're looking for horses to point for these races. It's our Super Bowl, it's our end of the year championship. And so you just hope you can participate on that day.
I like to go back in time a little bit. Well, it doesn't seem like it was that long, but 2011 with Animal Kingdom, who won the Kentucky Derby. And then what a career. Going on 2 years later, won the Dubai World Cup. And to my knowledge, this is still the only Kentucky Derby winner to win a Grade 1 at age 5. I believe that's right.
Yeah, I mean, he was a special horse, Kenny. You were around me then, and you know how special he was to me. I mean, I never, getting in the business, I never necessarily expected to win the Kentucky Derby. I think it's almost too much of a goal to set for yourself, although everybody obviously wants to win it. And I think what he did after that, I mean, to just be beaten in the Breeders' Cup to Wise Dan when he finished second, and he was coming off a 6-month layoff that day, which is pretty unusual. I mean, it was amazing that Barry let me try that. And we almost pulled it off, and then he came back and, won the World Cup, which was an extraordinary night I'll never forget.
I thought that was really one of the more remarkable training jobs, to see the 3-year progress of Animal Kingdom. Like you mentioned, everybody had written him off, I think, but you guys. I mean, mostly, you come off 6 months and you're going to run the Breeders' Cup and you almost win it. And now we're going on to Dubai after that. That's really an amazing feat, Graham. I really, honestly, friendship aside, I think that's still one of the great training feats that I've seen.
Well, I think it's 2 things. It was, fortunately, Barry was crazy enough to allow me to do it. When I suggested to him that we could take a shot in the Breeders' Cup off a 6-month layoff, I think most people would have said, there's no way we can do that. But Barry went along with it quietly and let me do it. And then the other thing that was remarkable was the first year we went for the World Cup when he was injured. The first thing Barry said to me was, well, we'll take a shot next year. So, I mean, to have that kind of an attitude, I think that really helped. And besides that, the horse was just an amazing athlete.
Yeah, the things he did, first off, you're not supposed to win the Derby training him like you did. Remember all those questions when you came in? Because I was around the barn then, obviously. I covered that 2011 Triple Crown run. Wait, he's been on synthetics. Is this a grass horse? Is he really ready to run the dirt race?
I mean, really, the first time we got him on the dirt properly was that Sunday before the Derby. And
yeah.
He kind of put everything into one basket and said, look, if he works well on Sunday, and we tried to work him the weekends leading up to that, but it rained every weekend. So, finally it was this Sunday, the Sunday before, or nothing at all. And he worked awesome. I'll never forget hearing Bob Baffert had watched the work, and he said, that's the horse to beat. And that sort of, made me sit up at the time. I was a rookie, and it was an exciting week, that's for sure.
Talking with Graham Motion, of course, known for Animal Kingdom, most known for Animal Kingdom, as he should be, a World Cup winner, as well as obviously the Derby winner. Better Talk Now, Irish War Cry, I'm going to mention somebody, filmmaker, among your many outstanding horses. Winning your first race at 29 years old as a head trainer, I believe back in 93 at Laurel Park. That had to be some heady stuff for the kid from Cambridge, England, who came over and was assistant to the Hall of Famer Jonathan Shepherd for a few years.
Yeah, I started off, I always say Jonathan Shepherd was really my college. I worked for Jonathan for 5 years when I was out of high school. And then I went to work for Bernie Bond in Maryland, who was kind of a gruff older guy who really just trained 2-year-olds. He was iconic in Maryland for winning the 2-year-old races, which was such a good education for me. I came from working for Jonathan, who tended to have distance horses, to working for a 2-year-old trainer. And when Bernie retired, I took over the stable, and that's when I had my first winner, was with a horse that Bernie had trained called Bounding Daisy.
Wow, and look at this, and you've become a fixture in Maryland. I know you're out at Keeneland now, right? But home base is Fair Hill, Maryland.
Yeah, lucky to be at Fair Hill. It's a beautiful setup, and it's funny, Kenny, because when I first started training, it was almost unheard of for people to train stables that are now trained in training centers, if you like. I think Michael Dickinson was one of the first ones to really make it kind of appealing to train horses off the track, whereas now it's almost become fashionable to train in training centers instead of the track.
Graham, what have you noticed in the training, like you mentioned with Animal Kingdom, really getting the first really work on dirt just a week out from winning the Kentucky Derby? And we've seen now for over a decade trainers that are giving 6 weeks before the Derby to bring a horse in and run him again, which was unheard of, and not having a heavy campaign to get ready for the Derby. It seems like it's just a ongoing change of training methods and measures across the board for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's true. And look, I think as a trainer, I always studied, it always fascinated me how people got through the Triple Crown, because I think it's the trickiest thing to know how to handle your horse when you're running back in 2 weeks in the Preakness and then 3 weeks in the Belmont. It's something we never do at any other time of year. So it always intrigued me to see how trainers do it. And I think you're right. I think it's evolved so much, and it's almost become fashionable to bring your horses up to the Derby fairly lightly race, whereas I think in years gone by, it was the opposite.
Yeah, if you didn't have a horse, they say, what's wrong? He's only had 2 races. Has he been sick or injured? Now it's kind of commonplace, 2 or 3 races. That's a full campaign coming into the Derby.
Yes, no doubt. And when I had been to the Derby before Animal Kingdom, but I'd never come with the caliber of horse I had that day. And I think the events of getting him to the Derby were extraordinary. He was lucky to get into the prep race at Turfway. I think he just got in. He was one of the last ones to get into that race. And had he not, he probably never would have made it. So it's funny how how events like that can guide the future in horse racing.
You made a lot of people happy that day, including, you mentioned owner Barry Irwin earlier. People were finding out. They found out a lot about you. It is, I don't want to say a career maker. You were already established and respected, but, that's a famous race. I'll set that. You win a famous race, and certainly the Derby, I think, especially in the U.S., there's none more famous. Everybody knows the winner of the Derby now.
Yeah, when you wake up on Sunday morning after winning the Derby, you kind of have to pinch yourself, that's for sure.
I remember, before the Belmont, coming off his second in the Preakness, before the Belmont, I believe you went to your son's 8th grade graduation, or was that Jane, your daughter's 8th grade graduation?
Yeah, that would have been my daughter's, that's right.
Been Jane's, yeah. Which we all found fascinating at NBC, how calm and collected you were. Your first big run through the Triple Crown, and you still had priorities. You had time to take off a day and go see your family and see your daughter graduate 8th grade.
It was definitely tough for those 2 weeks to sort of get your head around anything else other than the Derby winner. But you got to make time, and I'm fortunate that my wife keeps me straight. And I will tell you this: there's nothing comparable in my mind as to going to Pimlico with the Derby winner for the Preakness. That was just the most extraordinary feeling, walking over, being the only horse that can win the Triple Crown. And really, most people are rooting for you to win, let's face it. That's a pretty special feeling.
And home track, more or less for you, home area, certainly Maryland, Laurel, Pimlico area. I mean, to be coming, kind of like a homecoming in some ways, I guess, for the guy from Cambridge, England, who's made his mark in Maryland racing.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, Pimlico was where I first met Bernie Bond, which was really what got my career started. And it was pretty humbling. And I really regret that he got beaten that day. I think he was really unlucky. He got off a step slow. And he just had to chase Shackelford the whole way. And I always felt that the middle of the track was much deeper than the inside of the track. They only raced there for 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And I felt like they'd added a lot of dirt, and it definitely had a different color to it on the outside. And when he came running, down the middle of the track after just not braking super sharp, it was just too much to ask for him to get to Shackelford. He couldn't quite get there, which was, to me, that was always a big disappointment because I thought he was very much within himself to win that race. And
you and Dale Roman's kind of maybe an unexpected friendship, friendly rivalry thing emerged. I remember sitting on a bench the day before and doing an interview with you, and of course with Animal Kingdom, and Dale with Shackelford. Do you remember taping that deal that we did? I guess it was the morning of the Belmont over there in the paddock looking at the Secretariat statue.
I think that's right. I mean, I had a sort of out-of-body experience with Dale when right after I won the Derby. I wasn't that familiar with Churchill Downs, and of course for Dale, it's his home turf. So I was in a little bit of a fog, if you like, and trying to figure out how to get to the winner's circle. And I saw Dale, who's, as you know, he's a large presence.
Yes.
And he's like, "I'm going to get you to the winner's circle. Follow me." So I kind of literally grabbed onto his coattails, and that's how I got down to the winner's circle. So
it is confusing, isn't it? After the Derby. If you won the Derby, everybody asks me, they think that you guys just come right up to me and everybody lines up and here's a nice, easy path and we all grab our interviews and things. But it's really kind of a controlled chaos in a fun sort of way, at least, trying to find out what's going on and where the winners are. And, I was looking for you and looking for Barry. Everybody's looking to see what's going on. And it has to be, I guess, I don't think it's frustrating as much as exciting for you because, they're not going to give the trophy out till you get there.
That's right. Well, let's face it, you don't go up to sit in the grandstand before the race thinking, I wonder how I'm going to get to the winner's circle for the Kentucky Derby. So we really didn't have a plan. And it is a big facility and there are a lot of people there. So by the time you get through, seeing everybody who wants to congratulate you and just the general throng. And I remember when I got down to the bottom of the stairs in the grandstand, I saw Chip Woolley, who'd won it maybe a couple of years before.
Yeah.
Things like that just really stick in your mind.
Was there a moment in that race that you thought Animal Kingdom's going to win this now? I'm going to win the Kentucky Derby. Was there a moment other than the obvious right at the very ending of it?
I tell you honestly, Kenny, I had run horses in the Derby before, and I always felt at the 3/8 pole, you kind of knew how you were standing. And usually my horses were running out of gas when they got to the 3 furlong pole, which is 3 furlongs from home.
Right.
So when I noticed at the 3/8 pole that Johnny had a ton of horse, and I'm kind of thinking, it looks like he's got a lot of horse and he's trying to figure out where to go. I must say, I was suddenly like, wow, we're in the game here. We got a good shot.
And that was a special moment. I enjoy the fact that you've always enjoyed your family and your wife and son and daughter, and everybody's been a part of your success all the way through.
Yeah, I mean, it was special to have them there for it. I mean, doesn't always work out that way. And my son missed school on Monday morning, and I remember he was probably in middle school, and his teacher said that was the greatest excuse he'd ever had for a kid missing school was because his dad won the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, that should get you out of school for a few days, shouldn't it?
That's right.
And I remember the whole thing with Johnny Velasquez coming aboard.
It was very odd. I mean, I could talk about it all day, but, I met Todd going to the draw for the Kentucky Derby, Todd Pletcher, in the parking lot before the draw. And he said, I might have a problem with my horse. I'm not 100% sure we're going to be okay. I think he'd had a few issues that week. I can't exactly remember. And my jockey, Robbie Alvarado, had been hurt a couple of days before. So there were a lot of moving parts. It was extraordinary. I went to Johnny myself. I knew where he was staying. I think it must have been on the Thursday or the Friday before the Derby. And basically we'd made a decision that if Robbie wasn't able to ride on Oaks Day, that he probably shouldn't ride our horse in the Derby, which I think, honestly, for Barry and the partners, it was a fair decision. I'm sure Robbie would disagree because he tried so hard to get back to ride on Saturday, but he'd had a pretty nasty injury.
Right.
Johnny became available. I spoke with Johnny in the hallway of his hotel and said, look, I think you can ride this horse if that's what you want to do, if Todd's not running, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's kind of like the perfect storm, wasn't it? Everything came together when it could have fallen apart when you lost Alvarado as your jockey.
Yes, and I mean, as badly as I feel for Robbie, who'd worked the horse, Johnny was a pretty close friend of ours. Our kids grew up together, so, you hate to get too soppy and too sentimental in the racing game because it can be a pretty cruel game. But it was extra special having Johnny on the horse. There's no doubt about it.
Among the many things I like about Graham Motion, a good family man, an outstanding trainer, and a guy who has an opinion. I read your tweets. You have a lot of opinions. And one especially now is what has gone on with the story that came out last week in the New York Times about scopolamine being found in the system of Justify around the Santa Anita Derby time. We had talked earlier with Dr. Mary Scollay, who I know you know, who made some interesting comments about, like, scopolamine is not even tested prior to the Derby. Afterwards, yes, but not prior to, because most don't consider it performance enhancing. And even like the International Doping Association that controls the Olympics, they're pretty strict there. They think scopolamine is acceptable. They don't accept everything. They'll accept that. So that seems a lot. And I guess, Graham, the whole question I have for you is, with when you get into nanograms and talking about general public confusion that a lot of people have had over Justify, do you think that this is at least going to maybe try to trigger some talk that people are going to try to sit down in horse racing and have some uniformity and better communications so you don't have another story like this coming out?
100%, Kenny. I mean, I hope something good comes of this. And to those that don't know, first of all, you have to realize that we're talking about nanograms, and a nanogram is a billionth of a gram. I mean, that is an extraordinarily small measurement. Clearly, they've had an issue with this contamination in California before. It's something that's found in the hay and the bedding, particularly in California. And I think it's probably a good thing. Well, I know it's a good thing that the California Racing Commission made the decision that this should not be a positive for Justify. This is something they had several cases. My understanding is they had several cases that weekend of the Santa Anita Derby, which has happened before in California. And they made the decision that this was a contaminant. Now, the problem is that the RMTC, of which Mary Scollay is now the head, are pretty adamant that contamination does not exist in other forms. They allow for, I could be speaking wrong, but I'm a little vague to it, but I'm fairly sure this is right. They allow certain amounts of contaminants with some medications, but not with others. And that's where I have a problem. And the fact that each state has different guidelines for medication, this is a big problem for our industry. And I think because of this, we constantly give ourselves a black eye in our sport. Our testing is actually very rigorous in horse racing. Yeah. But we're dealing with animals, we're dealing with livestock, and we're shipping into, for example, when we go to Keeneland in 2 weeks, we're right on the heels of these stalls where we house the horses, having yearlings that are being prepared for the stales, where, if a horse has a temperature, they're going to get treated with medication. So it's very easy for a contaminant to be left in a stall that the yearling was treated with, when you're measuring that smaller amounts, a billionth of a gram, we're talking. In my opinion, it's very easy to have contamination. And I think the trainers deserve to be protected better than we are going forward, because that's what will prevent things like this happening in the future.
And, to me, the timing of it all, too, I'm not here to defend it. Bob Baffert, what a class act he is. He doesn't need my, defending him. I mean, his record speaks for himself. And the way the horse ran, I told someone in an interview last week, I didn't see an uproar among the fellow trainers or owners that were going against Justify. That's how good the horse was. And And I guess the whole point of this is, Graham, do you think sometimes, and again, I'm talking more of those on the outside looking in or very casual fans, it's not like it's just full of performance-enhancing drugs and they're at the ready and everybody's using this stuff?
Look, I think 99% of the trainers do not want to cheat. You're always going to have somebody in any sport.
Sure.
You're always going to have people that are going to try and take an edge in any sport. But most trainers out there want to play by the rules. The trouble is that the rules are constantly changing. The guidelines are constantly changing. And we're dealing with livestock. And it's, it makes it very easy to have mistakes. And, in this country, every state has different regulations. So every time, I'm stable at Fair Hill. Every time I run a horse, I have to ship somewhere, whether it's Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, or New York, or even across to California. And I'm having to follow different rules all the time. And, it's unrealistic to say that you can't medicate horses, because horses get sick. Mm-hmm. Horses get wounds. Horses need to be treated, just like humans. So it's only fair to us that we have better guidelines to follow. And that's what I take issue with in this. And I honestly believe that the Racing Commission in California probably did the right thing. What they should have done, though, was been open about it rather than keeping it under the table. That's what creates a problem. Yeah,
the timing of it was really suspect now. I mean, to me, before last year's Belmont, after last year's Belmont. But again, it's sensational. It brings attention in a negative light, I think, to the sport overall. I just hope maybe, as you have eloquently put, that somebody steps back in the industry and says maybe we can get like New York, California, Kentucky, Maryland, the major Florida, major racing states come together and just have almost, if you will, like a Supreme Court, have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people things go through to say, this is nanograms and things are too confusing. Let's have a universal thing that if Graham's shipping his horses from Maryland to wherever, or Baffert's coming from California to wherever, everybody's on the same page. And it just seems too simple, doesn't it?
We need to do better, though, Kenny, because we're constantly opening ourselves up to criticism. You can blame Joe Drape for the article in the New York Times, but at the end of the day, we can only blame ourselves for putting ourselves in this position. We need to run our industry better. We're running for millions of dollars. The horses are worth millions of dollars. So we need to be doing better. We need to do a better job of protecting our game.
I think so. If you ever run for a commissioner or something, I'll vote for you. I don't know.
I probably wouldn't be very good at it. I probably have way too many opinions, but it does frustrate me. It hurts me in this game. It makes it almost spoils the constant concern about running out of state.
Yeah.
It's always a worry to me, and another issue I have is the testing is so stringent. We're testing for such minute levels that the testing barns where our samples are held should be like labs almost. And a lot of tracks, they're not. And I think we as trainers deserve that. I think our samples, when they're taken from the horses, should be kept in a much better condition than they are.
Well, and one thing I would like to see is just what you're doing now, speaking out. Not a lot of trainers or owners want to speak out, and I guess no one wants to hurt anybody's feelings or come in where there's hard feelings when you ship somewhere. But I do think that there needs to be it the Breeders' Cup or NTRA or someone in authority, to take a little stronger stance of things that you're saying and say we got to look at our sport and not be apologetic all the time and be on the defensive all the time.
Well, that's the truth. And I tell you, trainers on the whole won't speak out. And I was probably the same until I had my own situation with a positive I had several years ago, which I feel very strongly was caused by contamination, because there's no other way it could have happened. Mm-hmm. And until you're put in that position yourself, you tend not to want to speak out. But once you've been put in that position and everybody disappears from around you to protect you, you feel much stronger about it, I think, when you found yourself in that position.
Well, and again, like you say, it to me, it makes sense. It's, I think, too simple is probably why they won't do it. But especially after this and after this negative publicity, for some of the commissioners from the different states to get together and just say we should seek uniformity, it just seems and take in a lot of things you just said about, these nanograms, when you're talking a billionth of a gram, it does just seem kind of asinine to me. And I know it does to people that barely know the sport. It confuses them because most of my friends are not horse racing guys. They're other sports guys, and they've asked me to try to explain all this for the last week.
But Kenny, if nothing else, if we can't come up with a governing body because of the state rules, I understand that because of the gambling.
Right.
But if nothing else, why can't we have some kind of an oversight commission that, say, the stewards can call on a Saturday in New York when they've got a questionable call, like in the NFL? Why can't they have a direct line to a group of stewards who oversee everybody and who can give them advice on how to handle a bad call? Why can't we take a positive test to an overseeing group who advise them on how to handle it? Why can't we have a media group that can answer to these problems we've had, these tragedies we've had in California, the positive of Justify we're finding out about? We need someone to get out in front of this and help us to deal with it. Every other sport in this country has somebody that helps them with that, and we don't, and that's a terrible shame.
Well put, Graham, as always. That's why I knew you'd be perfect for this show today.
Well, thank you, Kenny. Hopefully we can do better. It's a great sport. I'm incredibly lucky to be part of it, and that's why I feel so strongly about it.
Well, best wishes, Sheringham, Mississippi, on the way to the Breeders' Cup. We hope for you.
Fingers crossed. I'll see you there, Kenny.
And great catching up and reminiscing, too, about Animal Kingdom. Always a pleasure, Graham Motion. Thank you.
Take care.
All right. Great insight about a lot of things, as I knew he would. Stay with us. More of the Horse Racing Show right after this. And welcome back into the Horse Racing Show. Thank you for joining us here on our podcast, episode 35. Thank you for watching and subscribing to YouTube. We cannot stress that enough. If you have friends that are watching the show, and several people tell me they watch, they keep meaning to subscribe and they don't, please subscribe and like us on YouTube. And, of course, thank you for listening on Google Play and iTunes and at 93.9 The Ville in Louisville. Thanks to Dr. Mary Scollay today, Executive Director of the Racing Medication and Testing Consortium, and to Graham Motion, the trainer, who has a couple of horses that he hopes make it on to the Breeders' Cup. And, of course, it was fun catching up and talking about Animal Kingdom and getting his take on all this that's going on. Because I think telling things from Dr. Scollay, who knows the business inside and out, when she said scopolamine is not tested before the Derby. They don't test for that because they don't consider it a performance enhancer. And that the World Anti-Doping Association, which controls the Olympics, they allow scopolamine. And they don't allow much. I mean, there's people that they've taken prescription medication, and it's been considered not legal. And the whole point is this. To me, the timing of the situation, it's not to gloss over anything or say, let's go horse racing. Horse racing's clean. Nobody has a problem. We know. And like Mary said, it's a microcosm of society. Some people are going to do things they shouldn't. But not a guy like Bob Baffert and not people associated with him. That's just not going to happen. His integrity is impeccable. And also, it's not going to help the horse. But the timing of it all, this late after the fact, I think a lot of it has to do still with the problems they had at Santa Anita this year, that this is kind of the year to pile on racing. If there's something out there that you're just mad about, this is a good time to jump in and say something about racing. That's my opinion on it. I think the story had a lot of opinions, is more opinion than fact, in my opinion. Opinion of fact. So that's it. I don't think we should get excited. Justifies the Triple Crown winner. He's going to remain the Triple Crown winner, and that is the bottom line. Jay Alexander, great place. Love eating there. Doing my home area of Lexington, Kentucky, but all over the country in 11 states. We have dinner for two that we're going to give away. We got one today. A winner is Amy H. from Lexington, Kentucky, so this will be coming her way soon. You still have time to enter to tell us more about that, because you can eat in any one of the 11 states with this dinner for two. This is over $100. You go out and have dinner at J. Alexander's, it's going to be over $100, and it's going to be well worth it for the steak, for the crab cakes, for the ribs. They always have a fish of the day that's always outstanding. They bring it in fresh. So it's going to be well over $100 if you go out and have a good time. If you go out and have appetizers, then don't enter it. You don't want to enter it for appetizers, although they have good appetizers too. Thomas Kenny will now tell us how you can enter this so you can be like Amy H. of Lexington and win dinner for two. There's 3 more to give away.
So what you're going to do is you're going to go below this video that you're watching.
Wow, right there.
And click into the description.
I'm looking to see it's crawling under us. Okay, I felt it. Okay.
In the description, there will be 2 links. One will be a link for this Jay Alexander's giveaway, and the other will be a link for a monthly giveaway we're doing for a big-ass fan.
Which is behind me, and it's boxed up.
It's called a Haiku. It's a 52-inch ceiling fan, so it's, something you can actually use. You don't need a barn or a warehouse to put this one up.
They have great fans. And big-ass fan's a good fan. And they sponsor horse racing. They sponsor a Breeders' Cup race, I believe, yeah. Okay, so 2 things. So you can still eat. Hey, you might win twice. You could eat. You could come back. It's still hot enough in most of the U.S. You put that fan on. You cool down at night. You had a big dinner. Now you go to sleep. 2 for 1.
2 for 1, that's right.
Okay. So all you have to do is click on the link on this video, or you can go to our website or our Twitter page, right?
Mm-hmm. We're going to be putting up posts with the link there as well.
Okay.
Should be all around the same time when this video goes up on Wednesday.
Okay.
So for those of you listening on the podcast, you should go to either our Facebook or our Twitter and look there for a link. And all you have to do, you give your first name, your last name, and your email. Your last name and email are not going to be released publicly. That's just so that we know, where to give the prize to, basically.
Okay.
And you can do some little bonus things almost in a raffle-esque way to get extra entries into the giveaway. Like if you go to our YouTube channel, that'll give you another entry and things like that.
Okay. And so if your name's not Scott Hall or Ben Chaffins or Thomas Kenny, you're eligible to win.
That's right.
It's too bad because I really like the key lime pie at Jay Alexander's.
I'll take you guys out there.
All right.
We'll go out there.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Ben. And thank you for tuning in this week. Again, thanks, Dr. Mary Scollay and Graham Motion. Great guests again. More great guests coming up next week on what we'll call episode 36 of the Horse Racing Show. Until then, be sure to enter these contests. I'm Kenny Rice. So long, everyone.